Welcome to Rookie Me Central's second night of AFL Draft action. It was a bumper night last night, and we're back again to preview what could be another huge night down at Marvel Stadium. Of course, on my right is AFL Draft editor Michael Alvaro, and on my left, AFL Draft analyst Ed Pascoe. Boys, it was a very exciting night last night. Michael, you were there. How'd you find it?
Yeah, pretty exciting. It's good to be, I guess, among the hustle and bustle of draft night and seeing all the draftees in their new kits. So, yeah, always exciting. The best time of the year.
And Ed, how'd you find it watching on?
Yeah, it was pretty expected in those early days just watching it at home, but as soon as we got into those later first of the round, which we'll get to a bit later on, yeah, it was a bit of entertainment, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So, as I said, we saw a bumper first night of action. The top 10 largely went to script before our man, who we interviewed last week, Kinnear Beatson, grabbed that script and ripped it to shreds. So, we're going to get stuck into that and more coming up. All right, let's get stuck straight into the content. There was plenty to unpack from last night. We're going to start at the very top. We'll go with the top four first, because every single person, I think, that did a Phantom draft, known to man, knew who the top four were going in. Obviously, Aaron Cadman was pick one. We had Will Ashcroft's bid come in as expected from North for Brisbane. There were a couple of trades done. We'll discuss them after. Then, of course, there came Harry Sheezel and George Wardlaw. Michael, we'll start with you. What did you think of the first four? Not really any surprises.
Yeah, I mean, not much to sort of add to it. These four have been sort of, I guess, pegged as being the quartet to go first off the board for a long time. So, yeah, Cadman, the number one pick to GWS, obviously a guy that they're looking for in terms of on-field personnel, but also off-field has that lack of go-home factor, which would be valuable to them. Will Ashcroft, probably the best kid in the country, deservingly gets picked up at pick two with the bid. And then, I mean, there was maybe a bit of conjecture of the order of the next two, so Sheezel went before Wardlaw, but I mean, we knew that they were going to end up in blue and white, so no harm done.
And we spoke about this yesterday, Ed, but the pick one, choosing Cadman over doing a bid, what are your thoughts if you were in GWS's shoes? Do you like what they did, or would you have preferred they bid on Ashcroft to have the extra points?
I mean, they've put obviously a lot more time into Aaron Cadman because, you know, Will Ashcroft, I think everyone knew was going to be good, but especially for GWS in that scenario, they've got to look for the player that they've got to, you know, they're definitely going to pick, and they're going to put so much time into that player. And as much as it is a reward for Cadman as well for all the hard work he's done this year, I mean, it's hard not to say that his form has been way above any other key forward we've seen in recent memory, not from just his goal kicking, but just his consistency and his ability to get up the ground. So I think it's mostly a reward for Cadman and to really show that he's done the work to really deserve that pick one mantle.
Yeah. And we'll discuss sort of the next six or so in brackets, just because they were a bit of, I guess pick five was the real pivot point. Elijah Sardis was the choice in the end. The other one they were deciding was Mateus Philippou, who ended up going all the way to 10, as we know, at St Kilda. The other selections were the, I guess, more predictable ones based on what happened with Sardis. Bailey Humphrey out of Gippsland Power went to Gold Coast. Then Cam McKenzie, Hawthorn nabbed him. He's a Hawks supporter. They nabbed him over allowing him to get to St Kilda. Jai Clark to Geelong was probably the most obvious one a while out from the draft based on Joel Selwood retiring. And then the other ones that were in there, of course, ninth was Reuben Gimby to West Coast, another fairly predictable one. They traded down the order, many suspected to get him. That eventuated. And then Ollie Hollands to Carlton. I know he's just outside the top 10, but I think everyone sort of predicted that, went for the tour of Carlton. We all saw it happening, so that was interesting. We'll discuss those next six. We'll start with you, Ed. Obviously, Sardis at Oakley. You've got the ties with Oakley, so give us a bit of a rundown into what he's going to offer at your club as well, at the Bombers.
Yeah, I mean, Essendon with this pick obviously have gone for the best performing midfielder. I mean, the midfield is definitely something they've had to bolster. I mean, you could make a case that they need a more big bollocking body, and although Sardis is 186 centimetres, he's not quite that. But again, he only just turned 18. He's a very light-bodied. He can still, you know, put some muscle onto that frame and become a bigger midfielder like Dangerfield did in his draft year. He was a fairly light-bodied player and then put on some muscle and then had that confidence to really break through packs and use his body, and that's what Essendon will be hoping for Sardis. And I mean, for the last 2 to 3 years, he's been talked up as one of the best players in this draft pool. So it's not like they've come and got someone from, you know, out of nowhere. This is a player who, despite some injury issues this year, has been one of the best performed players in this year's draft.
And Michael, the majority of those in this group are, well, firstly midfielders. There's some that can play forward obviously as well, but they're just the consistent bunch, and for me they're probably the easy choices in terms of if you're looking for a midfielder that can come straight in, play a role, have an impact. For some of them obviously forward, but there weren't too many surprises basically. This group seemed like it was maybe that next cut above the next group.
Yeah, I mean, as you allude to, most of those guys you'd expect for most top 10 picks to be able to play pretty soon next year. So, Bailey Humphrey at the Gold Coast, pretty hard to crack a good midfield there. Might start up forward. Cam McKenzie is that sort of big body that Hawthorn was after, so he could get a gig. Jai Clark, I mean, they've got heaps of talent in the midfield at Geelong. Obviously just brought in Jack Bowes as well, among others. So might be tough for him, but he's as ready-made as anyone. Ruben Gimby, long-term midfield depth, could even drop back and fit in there. Mateus Philippou the same, but forward. So, and even Ollie Holland is a great get for Carlton in terms of list needs. So all of them you'd expect to be right in the frame to play pretty early. And as you allude to as well, though, once Sardis went to Essendon, the order from then on was pretty clear. So, penned out that way.
I mean, just as a general rule of thumb, did you sort of find it just those 11 that were you hoping there might be a bit of a surprise there, Ed? Were you hoping someone had pulled something out of the box, or, you kind of, it is what it is?
I mean, if there was a surprise, it was probably more so going to be one of those players just going to another club overall. So, say Gimby may have gone to Gold Coast, or Philippou would have gone to Hawthorn. So, at the end of the day, we're seeing the same names around that point. And a lot of them are those taller midfielders that play similar style anyway. So, it's not like those clubs, even if they pick that other player, aren't addressing a need in some form or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what happened was the bids began. I know we had Will Ashcroft earlier, obviously, but Jasper Fletcher was bid on by the Bulldogs, which is something you sort of alluded to. I know, Michael, you were saying yesterday the Bulldogs might want to get him back for the Dunkley, that he was going to pay full price, as Beveridge said, at the best and fairest. Sort of vindicated that little bit. What were your sort of thoughts on that bid, and then obviously going what many predicted to be in Buslinger?
Yeah, I mean, well, if they're going to get a bumper crop, you may as well make them accountable. So you bring in the best kid in the country for, I mean, let's be honest, like not that not that bad of a deal. Even got him at pick 2. So Jasper Fletcher probably was in that sort of back end of the first round range on talent. Jump at him a bit early. He's going to be matched, so you may as well do it and get that little bit back. But he's a super talented player. Obviously, he's got some injuries that he'll need to address heading into his first pre-season, but a balanced midfielder who can play inside and out, super skills, and kicks long goals for fun, as we witnessed. So, should be a super get for Brizzy.
Yeah, absolutely. Brisbane getting a couple of star mids. Geelong lose their all-time premiership skipper and bring in someone who's probably going to do the same thing long term. So good for those clubs. Elijah Hewitt to West Coast came after that, and Matthew Jefferson to Melbourne. Ed, I mean, that was again... not everyone sort of picked Hewitt, but he was linked to them, whether it was that pick or later on, but they managed to get him. And then Jefferson, I think, was linked just about by everyone to Melbourne. Your thoughts on those?
Yeah, so especially with the Eagles having to trade back from that pick too, they obviously had a bit of an inkling that maybe a player they took there might have been a bit of a flight risk. And then they take arguably the two best performed West Australian midfielders, and that is an area that West Coast have had to improve, definitely. So now they've got two of the best young local midfielders in the at their disposal now. So that's a really good one for them. And with Jefferson, I mean, in terms of pure numbers, he's right up there with Cadman in terms of goals kicked and the amount of marks he takes. I mean, whenever he was jumping up for a mark, I mean, you could almost put it down as a mark, as he just reads the ball so well in flight. I mean, he's still very light-bodied, so he's going to take some time, but that's why him going to a club like Melbourne, who are already competing, he's not going to be expected to play very early on. He can then develop, work in his craft at that level, and he could still kick quite a few goals next year for the Casey Demons. So he's one that Demons fans should definitely be excited about.
Absolutely. Once pick 15 was done, just as it looked like everything was smooth sailing, we were going to just cruise to the finish line with the last few picks, our man Kinnear Beatson stepped up to the plate and said, no, we're making this a show. Bid on Harry Ralston. which we could see. Fair enough. We'll discuss him first. GWS weren't too happy about that, I think it's fair to say, on the coverage. They weren't expecting that. They had to match with 17. There were phone calls happening, everything like that. People trying to trade up, perhaps, and things along those lines. What were your initial reactions at the draft, and I guess the reactions perhaps around the room?
Yeah, I think most people in the room, with fellow media personnel at least, were a little surprised at that. A few sort of jaws on the floor. But I think GWS were more frustrated. Looking at their reaction, it might have been a case of that rather than they didn't expect it. So I think, there was potential for him to go within that top 20 with a bid. The fact that it was Sydney is great, playing into the rivalry a little bit. And I mean, they put a dagger in afterwards as well, which we'll touch on. But, Rouston as a player, you'd say, well, it's not totally sort of out of the realm that he could be a top 20 player. He's competitive, he's hard at the ball, moves the ball on quickly, so he's a bit of a Sydney player as well. So it makes sense. Yeah, it does make sense. They went with Rouston, and then, as I'm sure you'll mention now, they went with another bid straight after.
Yeah, they did. They weren't done just yet. They bid on Adelaide father-son, Max Michaelani. Ed, we knew he was going to come in around this range. The Pies were considering putting a bid on him, probably a couple other teams as well. Swans got in first. Your thoughts about where most people sort of expected a bid to come in? We probably thought a little bit later a while back, but then, there were a fair bit of talk about it coming then.
Yeah, I reckon Swans were probably looking at a player like Michaelani as that Dane Rampy heir apparent, even though Rampy's not that old, but still a player that plays in a similar style. He can lock down really well, can kind of play on talls and smalls a bit, very wiry. He's going to take a bit of time to develop that body, but he's going to be a good future prospect for Adelaide. They've still got some good young defenders down there. They've got Duday there, who's really leads that back line really well, and Michaelani's going to learn so much off someone like Duday. So Adelaide having to match that, they knew they were going to be matching that kind of bid when they made the trades that they did. So just another nice prospect for the Adelaide Crows.
And then from there, Kinnear beats and went, nah, we've had enough of bidding. We're getting rid of this pick because we got rid of the only club that was going to take the player we wanted with a selection inside the top 20. So they got rid of GWS, traded out to Hawthorn. They traded pick 18 and they received back pick 27. So they'll be featuring reasonably high tonight. A future second and a future third, which is a very good result for them. I guess first on the trade, what are you guys' thoughts as a general sort of rule of thumb? And then obviously Hawthorn picked Weddle.
Well played to Sydney. They had a perfect night one, I would suggest. Obviously they still got a pick in the first round right in front of GWS, and managed to allow Hawthorn to get that pick 18 for someone that they wanted, and wanted more so than Sydney, obviously. So, perfect sort of dealings there from them.
Now, is that I assume it's a Hawthorn future round too?
Yes.
Yeah, which is a very big carrot. Yeah. Like, no disrespect to the Hawks,
well,
but
it could be essentially like
could be pick 19.
Yeah, exactly.
Realistically, and probably at the very least, you'd think early 20s. In which case, early 20s.
Got a little faith in Sam Mitchell.
Late 30s. He said he's not making up numbers. He's wanting to go the full rebuild. So, that's fair. And I wouldn't think that it would be above, let's say, 24 as a generous kind of thing. Bottom 5,
well, you think
6.
they're essentially a bottom 6 team?
Absolutely. Do you think they're
better
than a bottom 6? Would you agree they're a bottom 6? Yeah. All right. So, just trying to stir controversy for no reason there, Michael. Love it. Weddle obviously got selected, and then there were the final 3. Collingwood got their man Ed Allen, who slid from West Coast, and then Sydney picked up Jacob Constanti, which was probably the second biggest dagger for GWS on the night, because they obviously wanted to get him, and I dare say they wanted to get him with that pick that they had to use on Rouston. So Sydney just went bang bang, knocked them out, picked up Constanti, and then GWS, who they obviously wanted this kid as well, but perhaps they wanted Constanti with him and Rouston after these picks, picked up Darcy Jones. So thoughts on Constanti first, and Sydney making that move.
Yeah, well, I'll let Ed talk on Constanti because he's seen him from a while out. I know he likes him. Just in general, to sneak in ahead, the big brain sort of thinking that goes behind. Obviously the bid initially to wipe out that pick, so GWS gets out of the order. Just insane. Sydney to get Constante is really good. Ed Allen to Collingwood, developable, probably comes in, replaces someone like Caleb Poulter. And then Darcy Jones, GWS said that they identified probably a handful of players they wanted, and there were a lot of smalls in that bunch. They still have a pick at the start of the first round anyway to get another. So Darcy Jones is one who Adam Kingsley said to the man himself they rated as the best small in the draft crop. So, I don't think it's all doom and gloom for the Giants. They still get one that they really wanted. But, Constante, if you can highlight what I guess he does well, Ed.
Yeah, so just first with Sydney beating GWS to that pick. I mean, GWS have put a lot of time into Constante the whole year round. So, I mean, it really is a big dagger for them. And considering I don't think Sydney put anywhere near as much time into him as the Giants did. So that's a really good pick up for Swans. I mean, he's Tom Papley heir apparent. I mean, Papley again, he's still got quite a few years left. But I mean, Constante's just so much like him. He's very energetic. He wants to be involved in the play. He puts pressure on. He kicks goals. He sets up. He can go through the midfield at times as well. He's just got that real energy, and he's so clean as well. I mean, at ground level and above his head, he just doesn't fumble. He's going to be a very difficult matchup, and he's probably going to play some senior football fairly early on.
I know we'll probably discuss him and some of these players later, but it would actually be semi-enjoyable if Sydney picked up Charlie Clark as well. Just because you mentioned the sort of irritating but really energetic players who love goals and don't mind getting into the head of opposition. And I'm just sort of picturing if he teamed up with Constante and Papley inside the forward line, how irritating that would be for opposition defenders. So I think that would be very, very interesting. But obviously I suspect he'll go higher. What we're going to do now is we're going to cut to an interview with Mark Browning discussing some of the Allies prospects, including Harry Ralston, who ended up as GWS, as we said, and Tasmanian talent Lachlan Cowan. Here's my interview chatting with Mark Browning. Yeah, so obviously with the AFL Women's, then we've got the draft, so it's a busy weekend, I guess, for Queenslanders in many regards, supporting Brisbane and then seeing how many will get picked up in the draft. So I guess we'll start with the Queenslanders and then we'll move on to the Allies' potential prospects. We've got Jasper Fletcher, obviously, is the first one we'll talk about because coming through that sort of father-son, I know that Will Ashcroft is too. He's obviously spent a fair bit of time down here in Vic. So Jasper, who's sort of been a part of that Quaffle system, give us a bit of a rundown into how he's developed over the years and coming through the Queensland teams.
Oh, look, he's always been a very gifted player skill-wise. And the good thing is he's had a real growth spurt over the last 12 months. So he's probably 180, 182, 183 now. So, he's a good size. But the main thing is with Jasper, he's just a in and out type player, can play outside, can play inside, kick long running goals, makes good decisions with his players, terrific character, trains hard. And the big improvement for this year, I think, is really impacted games. And being able to, both with the Allies and the Lions Academy, being able to change games in a quarter of pretty dominant footy. A few times he's come out of the middle with that run and bounce and then kick goals from outside 50. So he's certainly on the up. He's got a little bit of a hot spot on his foot, but that's nothing too much to worry about. And a little nag in the back, but that's nothing major either. So look, he's an outstanding player, and with real AFL attributes.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one coming through, Shadow Brain, obviously. He's another Lions Academy, but how's he sort of been tracking over the years?
Shadow Brain, yeah, he's an interesting player. Had a bit of an interrupted pre-season, had some groin issues. But I still remember clearly in my head the first time I saw Shadow play in an academy game down in Blacktown. His first quarter was unbelievable. I was standing with National Talent Manager Kevin Sheehan, and he's just clean hands, decision making, just seemed to have plenty of time when he had the ball. Of course, he ran out of steam a little bit because he was a little bit underdone, but he certainly got better as the year progressed, and he certainly played pretty well. in the Allies, mainly as a small forward. Kicked a couple of crucial goals late in the game against West Australia, which gave the Allies a fantastic win. And interesting for people is that he's actually in the pool. He's not a Lions Academy, even though he's in the Lions Academy doing the program. He hasn't been living in the zone for long enough, which is 5 years consistently, to be eligible for the Lions to be bid for in the draft. So he's actually in the national talent pool. But really, just got AFL attributes, clean, smart. I think he's got a massive upside.
That was myself chatting to Mark Browning last week about all the Allies prospects that are up for the AFL Draft. As I mentioned, Harry Ralston's already gone through. Of course, Jasper Fletcher as the other one as a match bid to Brisbane. And Lockie Cowan was one of the ones that is potentially going pretty high in the next group. Before we get to those prospects, though, we're going to talk the trades. There weren't many. It was built up to be potentially a bonanza of trades. I know Essendon's pick 4 kept coming into conversation, and whether other clubs were potentially trading down or around that. In the end, it just ended up being Brisbane taking advantage of the bidding system and getting a pick at pick 50, realistically. They made a couple of trades to match for Ashcroft and Fletcher, so I'll run through them quickly and basically just sum it up. Brisbane received pick 41, 50, 52 and 63 from Hawthorn. In return, Hawthorn received pick 36 and a future third round, so Hawthorn got in up the order a little bit. Then Brisbane also received pick 40 from North Melbourne in exchange for pick 63 and future round third, which I don't mind that for Brisbane. They've done pretty well there. So all up, they received 40, 41, 50, 52 and 63 and gave up 36 and then 63 again. And then a future round 3. So right now, as it stands, Brisbane has pick 50, 71, 81, 85, 86. We obviously know they're not going to use all of them. But getting pick 50, which gets them ahead of Richmond for comparison, is a massive get, given that they've got those 2 star players. Ed, what did you think of their trades and being able to get pick 50?
I mean, yeah, they've done fairly well there. I mean, they had to do quite a bit of wheeling and dealing to get all this things sorted. I mean, it's a lot of numbers that kind of go over your head a bit. It's a bit overwhelming for a few people that are going, hey, we're just worried about the players we're going to be picking here, and that we've got to worry about all these random picks that are getting thrown around willy-nilly. So, yeah, I mean, clubs are really smart when it comes to this kind of stuff and really getting the most out of picks and what they've got to do there. So, yeah, you can't complain about that at all.
And Michael, when it came up on the telecast that we had a trade in, were most people excited to see who'd got pick 4, and then they looked and went, oh, that's not pick 4.
Yeah, there's a bit of an anticlimax there. When the trade came in sort of on the graphic on the telecast, yeah, I mean, it didn't turn out that way, but obviously necessary business for the Lions and a great result for them for sure. Even North Melbourne as well there and Hawthorn.
So what I'll do now is I'm going to read out the next 10, or I should say the second round as it stands, and then we're going to discuss some of the players that could potentially go in that second round. So pick 22, first up. We know that this pick is often highly sought after because perhaps a club lower down the order has spotted a slider that hasn't gone in the first round, so there might be some offering up, but we sort of think that GWS might hold on to it. They've got pick 22, West Coast pick 23, Western Bulldogs 24, Essendon have 25, North Melbourne 26, Sydney's pick that they received at 27, Collingwood has 2 picks within 3 slots at 28 and 30, either side of West Coast at 29, then St Kilda at 31, Carlton at 32, Fremantle enter the draft down at 33, GWS again at 34, 35 St Kilda, and then Port come into the action as well at 36, Hawthorn at 37, and then Melbourne at 38. Ed, GWS, do you think they're going to hold on to that onto that pick?
I expect, like most years, a lot of clubs will be going after that first pick now that they know what's going to be available to them and can really sum up what the picks are looking at now, especially after all the bids have happened now. A few picks that were, in that 40s, 50s range have come up a bit more as well, so they hold a bit more value to certain clubs. So there's definitely going to be some questions asked, but I still reckon the Giants will hold on to that pick, much like the Fremantle, I think it was Fremantle had it last year, did as well. So if I'm going to be thinking of any players that'd be looking at, I mean, I mean, another small forward, Charlie Clark, he's probably going to be one who's in that mould. Braden George, I mean, you get an extra pick for getting Braden George, as he's going to miss the whole year next year. Is there anyone else you can think of?
Yeah, they're probably the two. Charlie Clark has been linked with the Giants for a long time, and if he's not gone there, then he'll probably be snapped up the first probably 2, 3, 4 picks of the second round. Lachlan Cowan, I think, will be in demand as well, high up in the second round.
The other one to discuss, obviously, we know Jacob Ryan's been linked to a lot of clubs. Collingwood, for example, potentially could have gone first round. There were some rumours about that. If Ed Allen didn't slide, that's who they were going for. Now that he hasn't gone there, potentially Collingwood might look to trade up if it's true that some of those clubs are interested in him. So there's another one. The other thing is, could anyone trade in to make other clubs honest? And I know you're not going to like this at all, Ed, but obviously Davey hanging around. We expect it'll be after Essendon's pick, so it's not going to be a huge threat. But could a club trade in to bid just to be funny buggers, or you reckon they're going to be nice to you?
Well, they probably could. I mean, there's nothing stopping them. I mean, a lot of clubs do a lot of intel on other clubs as well to see what they're doing. I mean, the fact that Essendon haven't really tried to get ahead of that pick would show that their intel is saying there's not going to be a bid there and there's no other clubs that really put in there. But I mean, it's still on talent. I still reckon he should definitely be a top 20 pick. So if a club wants to keep letting him go, that's great for the Bombers. But it's really tempting fate to see if that bid does come, especially when you're that close up. I mean, but that's the thing they've got to weigh up. I mean, no matter what, they're going to take him. So at the end of the day, we'll see.
And this will lead nicely into the next one. I know it's an early pick. You might end up trading down if you were to take on this scenario, but in the scenario that you got word that Anthony Mankara was going to go potentially late 30s or something like that, would Essendon risk it to take him at that pick, knowing that they'll get Davey because the bid hasn't come in? Or do you risk not getting Mankara and picking someone else?
I don't think they'll risk it personally. I mean, there's already very tight for list spots. I mean, if they're going to commit to Mankara, that's pretty much going to be the last list spot they have. Unless they do take someone like a Braden George at the start, they might be more willing to do that. But otherwise, I can't see it happening. They might, but I don't really think they'll be doing that. I think the only clubs that are potential to trade into that area would probably be Richmond and Geelong. I believe they're the two clubs with the most interest in Mankara. So if you see any live trades around then, that's probably what they're going to do. I just hope they don't do, kind of what Collingwood did to Essendon that year with Arlo Draper. I mean, he was a player I was definitely looking after for the Bombers, and I'm sure Dodoro, after his pen throw, was very keen on that player as well. So that's what you got to do. You got to be first. If you want the player, you just got to you really got to go out on a limb and get them.
Well, you've got to overpay, as we were discussing with Hawthorn, to get Weddle. If you're that keen, you've got to trade up and get it. So that's exactly what they did. Michael, on your end, are you expecting any live trades for those, or potentially players that might be of interest to someone lower down?
I'm not too sure on that front, but I think a lot of the players, like the next sort of dozen, a lot of the players are pretty set. I think a lot of clubs will have the top sort of, or the next 5 mostly in the same range. So I think it'll pan out that way. If a club is really keen, it's usually that sort of first pick in the second round, the GWS one in this case, as it was for Fremantle with Matthew Johnson potentially going first there on night 2 last year. So I think that'd be the only massive movement.
And then obviously we've got the other bids, if you like, coming into consideration. Some father-sons. We spoke about Mankara in terms of NGA Academy. We know if they slide, they've got to go to 41 or later if they're going to match a bid. Otherwise, a club may take them. Who are some of the players to watch out for in this next bracket and potentially after 41 onwards?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be too many bids remaining. Like in the national draft, a lot of the clubs will take their father-sons with the last pick. So you're looking at Jaden Davey for Essendon, Cooper Harvey for North Melbourne, Cooper Vickery's an NGA for Hawthorn who might go in the national draft, but you'd suspect that the rest of them will be taken as rookies. So Geelong's boys, they've got Ted Cloese and Oscar Riccardi committed to them as rookies. Nick Madden, a Category B out of the Giants Academy, could go there. You've got some quite random ones as well. Not so much random, but guys who you might not have expected, like Nathan Barkler for Port Adelaide. Angus McLennan's been nominated for St Kilda. Got Tyrrell Dwyer and Jordan Baker for West Coast. So there's a few hanging around there. Like even shadow brain. If he's not taken, he could be a rookie for Brisbane to pick up. So there's plenty knocking around. One that was omitted from that list, of course, for Melbourne is Finn Brennan. So it'd be interesting to see whether they have the intel that a club maybe was interested in him in the national draft, and whether they wanted to match that or not.
Yeah, I would have thought that he was going to be a late to rookie selection, but I also wouldn't have thought that. Like, I thought it would be a free hit. If you don't want to match, you don't match. Like, to me, that just seems a bit bizarre.
Talented.
Yeah, I mean,
a bit surprised.
Isaac Keeler was probably another one that was a bit bizarre that Adelaide didn't bid because there was no guarantee that he was going to go top 40 as well. So, I mean, there's might be just a few, because they are in, those teams' academies and all that, they've done their research on these players. They know them probably better than any other club would. Maybe there's just something there that they're just not quite sold on, something along those lines. I mean, on talent, Emil Brennan was showing some really good class down back. He's got some good athletic traits. He's got a lot of upside. And same with Keeler, he's such a great marking target and can get around. He's played a bit of ruck. He's played a bit of everywhere, really. He's just been thrown around. And I guess just up to the club's discretion what they want to do there. And if a club takes him, who knows? And
Melbourne did lose a bit of speed over that trade period. Obviously, we know Bedford, I know, is the other sort of end of the ground, but they lost him. Jaden Hunt as well left. So they have lost that bit of speed that they could have, not that they're slow, they've still got plenty of talented players there, but he was one I thought that you could at least nominate anyway.
Yeah, well, maybe with that pick 38 that they've got, that's the sort of area they'll target as well. Maybe they had that in mind, that they could get a good outside runner. There is a bit of speed
that could be there. I mean, there's Bailey McDonald, who's one who could really push up a bit higher. He is a really late bolter. Even though he doesn't play with that speed probably enough, but he does have it, is Rai Penny from Calder Cannons, who plays down back. He was one who really showed quite a bit at Vic Metro. So, and maybe even like a Nick Sadler, another South Australian player who's got quite a bit of speed in class. He might be another one they look for.
Yeah, there's a few clubs that haven't yet come into the action yet, so I just thought I'll quickly touch on them, see who you think they might be targeting, just in case their fans are watching and didn't find it very exciting last night. We've got Fremantle, obviously, and Port Adelaide, who are in this next round, and then Richmond later on. So, sort of, I guess, Ed, who do you sort of anticipate perhaps they might be targeting? Any of those clubs with players, do you think? Fremantle for starters.
I mean, Fremantle, there's quite a few West Australian prospects that already went in the first round of the draft, and there's still plenty out there as well. I mean, you've got Caleb Smith, who's come on as a 19-year-old, who's shown quite a bit as a dashing defender. They could go for any type of player as well. They're not always exclusive to the WA. So I think Bailey McDonald, again, will be another player they look at. They've got enough... they've got their NGA players as well, which they could, fill certain roles. But for a lot of people, this draft has been one where teams have been trading out a bit in those later picks. So they're just going to take the best talent they can available, maybe a mature age player.
And Port Adelaide, Michael, do you have any thoughts on who they might look at?
Yeah, could look at a local talent like Jaden Magor. I think he'll be in their hitting zone. Even Joe Richards, a mature ager out of local footy, that'd be a pretty cool story. I know that they've watched a fair bit of vision of him, and rightly so. So they're probably a couple who could be in the frame. I think Fremantle will look tall, so they do have maybe a need for those running players, but even a guy like Keeler, if he gets through, probably more so in the ruck or defensive end. So Jed Adams, Hugh Davies, they're local boys who could be in the mix.
McCallum is another one who,
yeah.
You mentioned before the go-home factor, and I know you did mention yesterday that maybe in 4 or 5 years there might be a go-home factor, but right now there isn't. So
yeah, exactly. Tasmanians, obviously, they can go anywhere and they won't have that, as you're alluding to. But he'd be one that suits the needs. They might look for a bit more height in that post, but I think it makes sense if he's one.
You ask any Port Adelaide supporter, a lot of them really want to add to that key defensive depth as well, and there are still quite a few on the board. Lewis Hayes is still there. A bit later on, you got James Van Ness, of course, Jed Adams, Hugh Davies has gotten a bit of interest. So there's plenty around there. It's just they're not quite in that top bracket, but that's probably a key area the Port will look at.
Yeah, I'd probably be very surprised if Lewis Hayes was on the board at 36. I'd say if that's who they want, they're going to have to trade up. There's no doubt about that. The other two potentially, depending, although St Kilda has consistently been linked to Van Ness as a potential pick, so we'll see what happens with that. Richmond, the last team, what do you sort of think? It's at 53, so we don't know, but they might trade up. Sold the farm to get in Taranto and Hopper, so I mean, where do you sort of rate what they could do?
I think if they're going to trade up, they might be looking at Mount Cara and really spoil the party for Essendon. But at the end of the day, Richmond, they're not against taking some players from other people's academies as well. So if there's another academy player, they'll probably make quite a few bids at that pick 53. I mean, if they're only there for that pick 53, they may as well get a bit of entertainment out of it. They already saw a bit of entertainment at the draft last night. So that could be the type of thing. But again, I don't think needs is really what they need to be going for right now. I mean, they've already addressed their ageing midfield by getting in Hopper and Taranto. So I think even going into this draft, they're always going to be taking a step back and going, all right, we'll see what comes our way, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spoke about it last night. Just quickly before we go, state combine invites. First one picked. Now you're saying Gallagher or Richards was your sort of thought.
I mean,
Have you changed in 24 hours or not?
Nah, I like those two, so I'll stick with them. Particularly Harvey Gallagher, I reckon he's a gun, so why not?
And who do you think will be the first state combine invite taken?
I would hope for Kobe Ryan. I reckon his consistency this year has been really good. He's not a bad athlete. I think the clubs are maybe a bit wary in what best position he plays, but I mean, he's played really well in the midfield. I mean, you look at his form in the reserves later in the year, he's getting 30 disposals in the finals for West Adelaide, almost trying to get him over the line. So I would like to see his form rewarded this year. Whether he gets taken first is anyone's guess. But in terms of guys who've missed a bit of the year, Will Elliott, of course, with the links to his father with cricket and all that, he's just an absolute star. I mean, he's 202 centimetres. He was in the Oakley leadership group before he got that injury.
Captain.
So captain even. Yep. So definitely has some talent, but of course hasn't been able to show it enough this year. I mean, there's been quite a few players that have had a few injury niggles. I mean, not as much as State, but Jack O'Sullivan was one who had some injury issues that went a bit later than he probably would have. Grzuski is another one who will be in the mix in the second round, who had a bit of injury niggles here and there. So there's definitely some room for some of these later picks to be some players that you go, wow, why didn't they go a bit earlier? It's just because they didn't have the form.
Yeah. Another Oakley boy as well, while we're at it, Luke Teal, of course, in that same category.
I couldn't list all the Oakley boys.
I was about to say we better get going before this turns into an Oakley podcast.
Love the Chargers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's lots of Oakley players that are injured that have unfortunately not been able to show their season, and that did affect their end result when they lost to Bendigo. So unfortunately, that is what it is. Hopefully a few of them get picked up. Luke Teal's feature is one that can be found on the website today as a nice link to close out today's podcast. So thanks very much for joining me again, Michael.
Pleasure as always. Yeah, keen for night two and to get it all out of the way finally.
Absolutely. We'll be back again tomorrow. Ed, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, always a pleasure to come on and talk about footy. It's what we all love. And just get ready to suck into night two.
Absolutely. It's going to be an exciting night. Of course, the rookie draft, pre-season draft, if that's even a thing anymore, that's going to be tomorrow. It's going to be a big couple of days still. So best of luck to any of the draftees watching. Hopefully your dreams come true. If not, obviously there's always next year, mid-season draft and ongoing drafts. So that's pretty much it from us here at the Final Siren podcast. As I said, AFL Draft Night coming up. Plenty of content across all our socials, so make sure you're following us at Rookie Me Central on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. We're going to have interviews going up from draftees and some from list managers and things like that. Make sure you check back and have a look at some of the interviews that we've done in the past week. Kinnear Beatson, before he decided to be very cheeky on draft night, we had a chat with him. Make sure you download our AFL Draft Guide, of course. That's still free and on the website for those teams that have already drafted players, if you're interested in finding out more, or for tonight ahead of that and once they're taken as well. So stay tuned. Make sure you're checking out the website. Plenty of stuff to come. Wraps tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow to recap everything from tonight and ahead of the rookie draft. That's it from me. Hope you have a good day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.